Today we're diving into three of the most misunderstood and most Googled topics in modern health: fasting, microplastics, and visceral fat. I'm Dr. Karan, and this is the Dr. Karan Explores podcast where we separate health from hype. You've probably heard that fasting can boost metabolism, heal your gut, and turn you into a fat-burning machine. But what does the actual science say? We'll unpack the data from randomized controlled trials, what we know, what we don't know, and how fasting can be both helpful and harmful depending on the context. We'll also explore how it affects your gut health, bloating, appetite, and even the gut barrier, and I'll explain why a little microbe called Akkermansia might be the unsung hero of your fasted state. Then we'll shift gears to something a bit more sinister: microplastics. They're in our food, our water, our homes, and yes, even our blood, unfortunately. But instead of doom scrolling, we'll talk solutions, from avoiding hot plastics and synthetic clothes to using fiber and fermented foods to reduce microplastic load in your gut. And this part is all about what you can actually do to protect yourself. And finally, we'll tackle visceral fat, the hidden fat around your organs that's far more dangerous than the stuff under your skin. I'll break down the best evidence-based tools we have to reduce it, from resistance training and sleep to diet and stress management. I'm Dr. Karan Rajan, and today we're separating hype from hard data so you can make sense of your health in a world full of noise. Now let's dive into fasting protocols, some of the science and benefits and caveats. Fasting, whether it's intermittent fasting like time-restricted eating, or alternate day fasting, or periodic longer fasts, has garnered attention for its potential health benefits. The highest quality data, and by that I mean randomized controlled trials and meta-analyses, indicate that intermittent fasting can be beneficial for metabolic health, though it's not a magic bullet. In adults who are overweight or obese, intermittent fasting may confer some extra metabolic perks. For example, an umbrella review of randomized controlled trials found that intermittent fasting reduces waist circumference, body fat, LDL, which is the bad cholesterol, triglycerides, total cholesterol, fasting insulin, and blood pressure, whilst increasing the HDL or good cholesterol and even fat-free mass. In short, it appears that intermittent fasting can help improve many markers of cardiometabolic health in the overweight or obese category. Notably, multiple studies show that intermittent fasting improves insulin sensitivity and lowers insulin resistance compared to eating all day. Now, many of these benefits likely stem from calorie reduction and weight loss, but intermittent fasting may also have unique physiological effects beyond a simple calorie cut. Now, I specifically want to dive into gut health and fasting. Now, interestingly, emerging research links fasting to positive changes in the gut. Periods without food allow the migrating motor complex, the gut's house-cleaning waves, to activate. These waves occur every 90 to 120 minutes during fasting and sweep out any residual food and dead bacteria. So actually spacing out meals at least 3 to 4 hours apart, or having a 12-hour or more overnight fast, can reduce bloating and lower the risk of small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, or SIBO risk, by giving your gut time to cleanse itself. For instance, a pilot study of Ramadan time-restricted fasting, which is around 17-hour daily fast, noted a significant rise in Akkermansia muciniphila. This is a mucin-eating bacterium linked to metabolic health and strong gut lining. Akkermansia is known to reinforce the gut barrier and is often depleted in obesity, so this increase suggests a gut benefit of fasting. In some human data, including in irritable bowel syndrome and colitis patients, there is some indication that an intermittent fasting regimen can reduce potentially harmful bacteria, for example, an overabundance of certain microbes, while increasing strains that promote a healthy mucus layer. This may explain why some individuals with digestive issues report less bloating and improved regularity when adopting a sensible fasting schedule. There's also evidence, mostly from animal studies I must add, that fasting reduces inflammatory endotoxin levels like LPS and improves intestinal integrity, although human data are still preliminary on that. It is worth noting that extremely prolonged fasting, days of water only, could actually stress the gut if not done properly. For example, there are some rodent studies that found that 72-hour plus starvation might increase gut permeability. But overall, it seems that moderate fasting intervals combined with a healthy diet appear to support the gut barrier rather than harm it. Now, a common question is whether fasting will just make you ravenously hungry and prone to overeating. The evidence here is mixed. Short term, when you first start intermittent fasting, hunger peaks around your usual meal times, as ghrelin, the hunger hormone, follows the circadian meal rhythms. But many people find this subsides as the body adapts. Meta-analysis so far have not found a clear overall difference in appetite levels between intermittent fasting and continuous dieting. In other words, when calories are matched, people doing intermittent fasting did not report significantly more hunger on average than those eating throughout the day. Some fasting protocols even report reductions in subjective appetite over time. Biologically speaking, fasting tends to lower baseline insulin and leptin levels, reflecting the improved insulin sensitivity and fat loss, and can transiently increase ghrelin before meals and boost appetite-suppressing hormones like peptide YY after you do eat. The takeaway here, pun intended, intermittent fasting doesn't guarantee hunger or fullness, and you might feel less bloated and more in tune with true hunger signals, but what you eat in your feeding window still matters for satiety. High protein, high fiber foods during eating periods can help to control appetite on any diet. There's also research suggesting intermittent fasting can benefit fatty liver and glucose regulation, but largely via weight loss. For example, trials in people with non-alcoholic fatty liver disease have found that time-restricted feeding improved liver enzyme levels and fat content similarly to standard calorie restriction. There's also an interesting connection between fasting and an increase in the levels of adiponectin and adrenaline that activate brown fat, which in turn is associated with reduced liver fat and improved metabolism. Some important caveats to mention is in type 2 diabetes, careful intermittent fasting under medical supervision has led to improved fasting glucose and even diabetes remission in some cases, but it must be done very cautiously. Medications like insulin may need adjustment to avoid hypoglycemia. Always consult a doctor before fasting if you have diabetes or any chronic medical condition. On the other hand, individuals with certain medical conditions or life stages should generally avoid rigorous fasting. Children, teens, pregnant or breastfeeding women, and those with a history of eating disorders or anyone who is underweight or frail. In those cases I mentioned, even time-restricted eating could do more harm than good. For women in general, some anecdotal reports suggest that overly long daily fasts, for example, over 16 or 18 hours or very low calorie intakes, can actually disrupt menstrual cycles or hormone balance. This illustrates that fasting is not a one-size-fits-all. Now, in rodents, autophagy or cellular cleanup is triggered by fasting, but translating that to humans isn't straightforward. You don't need to starve for a week to get health benefits. In fact, much of fasting's benefits can be achieved via daily time restriction and overall nutritious diet. Muscle preservation is a key caveat. If you fast, you still need adequate protein and resistance exercise to prevent muscle breakdown. As we've said on this podcast before, hitting roughly 1.2 to 1.6 grams of protein per kilo of body weight is important. Many people who skip breakfast or meals might fall short unless they plan carefully. Some studies have observed slightly lower testosterone levels in men using an 8-hour feeding window versus a 12-hour window with equal calories. The drop seemed to be modest, around 10 to 20%, and may be due to weight loss or transient calorie deficit, but men with already low T should be mindful of overly aggressive fasting. Also, gallstones can develop in susceptible individuals who lose weight too rapidly or skip meals frequently, as gallbladder emptying is reduced. So, if you have a history of gallstones, get medical advice before fasting. Another concern is something called refeeding syndrome. This is rare but serious as a risk if someone has fasted for many days or is very malnourished. When they eat again, electrolyte imbalances can occur. Now, this isn't an issue for typical intermittent fasting, but this underscores that fasts longer than 48 to 72 hours should have medical oversight. It appears like the most common approach is a 16 to 8 fasting, 16 hours off, 8 hours on. So, for example, 8 p.m. to noon, you fast and then you eat. This often naturally reduces calories by cutting late night snacks or mindless morning eating. Now, there's a growing field of chronogastroenterology which emphasizes aligning your eating window with daytime circadian rhythms. That means it's healthier to avoid late night eating and perhaps eat earlier in the day when insulin sensitivity is higher. Lastly, it's worth highlighting that fasting is a tool, not a license to eat junk during feeding periods, because an evidence-based fasting plan should still prioritize whole foods, plenty of vegetables, adequate lean protein, healthy fats, and complex carbs as needed. At the end of the day, some people would benefit from fasting and some people will probably feel miserable on fasting, so there's a lot of personal caveats and idiosyncrasies to bear in mind. Now, a topic which has garnered a lot of attention is microplastics, and I want to cover some of the risks and how to reduce your exposure. We are increasingly learning that microplastics, those plastic particles under 5 millimeters, including nanoscale bits, have infiltrated our food, water, and even the air. These come from the breakdown of plastic waste, synthetic clothes, tires, packaging, and even some cosmetic products. Tiny plastic particles have been detected in human blood, placentas, lung tissue, and even the gastrointestinal tract. And while research is ongoing, early evidence is concerning. Both animal and cellular studies suggest that ingested microplastics can trigger inflammation and oxidative stress in the gut. A 2022 scientific review warned that microplastics appear to reduce fertility and may even increase cancer risk in animals, especially cancers of the digestive tract. High concentrations of certain plastic particles caused gut cells to secrete inflammatory cytokines linked to conditions like inflammatory bowel disease. There's even some emerging data that people with inflammatory bowel disease have more microplastics in their stool than healthy people. Now, the nuance here is that whilst we can't say that microplastics contribute to IBD or inflammatory bowel disease, it's a worrisome association. In short, ingesting and inhaling these particles probably isn't harmless. Now, given these potential harms, it makes sense to take precautions to minimize microplastic exposure in daily life. We can't eliminate them completely because they're ubiquitous in the environment, but we can meaningfully reduce how much we take in. For starters, don't heat food or drinks in plastic. Heat is a major culprit for releasing micro and nanoplastics from containers. Microwaving plastic or pouring very hot liquids into plastics can cause millions to billions of particles to leach out. One study found microwave heating plastic baby food containers release huge numbers of nanoplastics. Similarly, hot water in a plastic tea bag can release 11 billion microplastic particles into a single cup. Now, to avoid or minimize this, you can use glass, ceramic, or stainless steel for heating and serving. For example, warm leftovers in a glass bowl or on a plate instead of a plastic takeout container. If you meal prep and store food, prefer glass storage containers or at least let food cool before putting it in plastic. The second thing would be to choose alternatives to plastic bottles and tableware, replacing everyday plastics where you can. For drinking, use a reusable stainless steel or glass water bottle instead of a single-use plastic bottle. Not only do plastic bottles shed microplastics, especially if they get warm or are reused, but studies have found that bottled water often contains more microplastic fibers than tap water due to the bottling process. And if you can, avoid polystyrene foam cups and plates. Aside from microplastics, they also leach styrene. Even plastic cutlery can shed microplastics when scraping on food, so consider carrying a set of bamboo or metal utensils if you're eco-minded. This is one a lot of people may not acknowledge, but minimizing synthetic clothing fibers in laundry, since a huge source of microplastic pollution is actually our laundry. When we wash synthetic textiles, polyester, acrylic, nylon, spandex, basically most workout clothes like fleeces, etc., they release tiny microplastic fibers into wastewater. It's estimated an average load of laundry can release around 700,000 fibers per wash. Wastewater treatment does catch some, but many fibers end up in rivers and oceans or sludge applied to fields. To reduce this, wash clothes only as needed. Frequent washing of synthetics equals more fiber release. And if you can, when possible, opt for natural fabrics like cotton, linen, wool, which shed far fewer plastic fibers. You can also use laundry filters or specialty wash bags that actually trap microfibers. Even simply using colder water or a shorter wash cycle can reduce fiber shedding. Being more mindful of excessive washing not only curbs microfilter pollution, but actually extends the life of your clothes as well. Now, a key thing a lot of people should do more of is ventilate and clean indoor dust. Indoor environments accumulate microplastics from dust, textiles, and furnishing. Now, one study found that indoor dust can be a significant route of human exposure because we inhale or ingest it. Regular vacuuming with a HEPA filter vacuum helps capture some of that microplastic-laden dust particle. You can also make sure you dust surfaces with a damp cloth because dry dusting can also send particles back into the air. Also, make sure you open your windows when the weather and air quality permit. Good ventilation can lower indoor pollutant buildup. It's also worth being mindful with cosmetics and toiletries. Surprising to many, a lot of makeup, skincare, and personal care products contain microplastics. These include exfoliating microbeads, those tiny plastic beads now banned in some countries, glitters or plastic-based fillers or polymers in products. Plus, plastic packaging can shed particles into creams or powders. Ultimately, one of the fixes for this could be simplifying your skincare routine, fewer products and those without added polymers to cut your exposure. Now, something I talk a lot about is a fiber-rich diet, and actually eating a fiber-rich diet that includes a lot of whole foods, including fermented foods, can actually play a role in countering microplastic side effects. Soluble fiber found in oats, barley, fruits, beans, etc. may help to bind and escort some of those toxic microplastic particles out of the gut. Whilst direct studies on fiber binding microplastics are limited but emerging, fiber is known to reduce absorption of various contaminants and improve gut barrier function. At the very least, a high fiber diet combats inflammation and supports a healthy microbiome, which might be under stress from microplastics. Moreover, we have exciting research emerging that suggests that probiotics in fermented foods could mitigate some of the harm. Probiotic bacteria like lactobacillus and bifidobacterium, those strains found in yogurt, kefir, kimchi, sauerkraut, etc., have been shown in preliminary studies to attach to or metabolize plastic particles and potentially neutralizing their toxicity. Now, whilst this is early stage science, it won't hurt to eat fermented foods regularly. They're safe and benefit your health overall. Finally, let's turn to visceral fat, often called belly fat, but not the pinchable kind under the skin. We're talking about the fat deep inside your abdomen, wrapped around your organs like your liver, pancreas, and intestines. This fat is metabolically active and hormonally harmful in excess. Unlike subcutaneous fat, the jiggly stuff right under your skin, visceral adipose tissue pumps out inflammatory molecules and is linked to much higher risk of cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, fatty liver, and more. In fact, you can have a pretty normal body weight yet still carry dangerous visceral fat around your organs. TOFI, thin on the outside, fat on the inside. We can't see it directly without an MRI or a CT scan, but a growing waistline or apple-shaped body is a good clue. Men and postmenopausal women tend to store more fat viscerally. So reducing visceral fat is a key health goal, perhaps even more important than what the scale says. The good news is that visceral fat responds very well to lifestyle changes. It's often the first fat you lose when you adopt a healthy diet and exercise regimen. It's also more metabolically active, meaning during a calorie deficit, visceral fat is tapped into readily. Hopefully, in the next few minutes, I can give you an evidence-based guide to burning visceral fat. Now, there's no avoiding the fundamental truth. To lose any fat, you need to burn more calories than you consume. A healthy, calorie-controlled diet is the cornerstone. The nice thing is that visceral fat tends to be lost even with modest weight loss. Studies show that a 5 to 10% reduction in body weight can yield a significant drop in visceral fat and improvements in insulin sensitivity. For this, it's key to focus on a diet rich in whole foods, vegetables, lean protein, fruits, whole grains, nuts, and legumes. And higher protein intakes can be especially helpful because it helps to preserve muscle as you lose fat and reduces hunger. Also, it's worth incorporating plenty of soluble fiber because beyond overall health, soluble fiber intake correlates with lower visceral fat gain over time. In fact, one 5-year study found that for each 10-gram increase in daily soluble fiber, think 2 small apples worth, this was associated with a 3.7% reduction in visceral fat accumulation. And those who coupled a fiber-rich diet with regular exercise cut their visceral fat gain even more, up to 7.4% less gain over 5 years. So fill up on oatmeal, beans, flax, Brussels sprouts, etc. because your belly fat will slowly shrink. Importantly, it's keen to limit or avoid sugary drinks, excessive alcohol, and trans fats, which preferentially promote abdominal fat. Now, it goes without saying that when someone is trying to lose weight, exercise is a good adjunct to that, and exercise is your visceral fat's worst enemy. Aerobic exercise like cardio has the most proven impact on reducing visceral fat stores. Meta-analyses of exercise interventions find that even without dieting, people can lose significant visceral fat through exercise alone. In fact, one meta-review noted that the relative production in visceral fat from exercise is often greater than the loss of subcutaneous fat. In other words, your body tends to target visceral fat when you start working out, sometimes before the scale even budges. Both moderate intensity continuous exercise like brisk walking, cycling, jogging, etc., and high intensity interval training are effective. But also be mindful not to neglect the weights. Resistance training like lifting weights or bodyweight exercises complements cardio by building muscle mass, which raises your resting metabolic rate. By itself, strength training may not always cut visceral fat as much as aerobic exercise, but studies show it does reduce visceral fat to a degree, and crucially prevents the loss of muscle that often accompanies weight loss. In some trials, combining resistance training with diet led to better visceral fat reduction than diet alone. And if you need yet another reason to quit smoking, here it is. Smoking is strongly associated with higher visceral fat deposition and a larger waist circumference, even in otherwise thin individuals. It sounds ironic because people think that smoking keeps them thin, but while smokers may on average have slightly lower body weights, they tend to have more abdominal fat and less of that healthy subcutaneous fat in the limbs. And recent genetic research confirmed that starting smoking causes a redistribution of fat to the belly. Nicotine and tobacco toxins likely interfere with hormones and cortisol, thus promoting central obesity and insulin resistance. So quitting smoking can help to rebalance your body fat distribution over time. In the long run, ex-smokers who stay active and eat well end up far healthier with less visceral fat than if they had continued smoking. Now, you've probably heard of the phrase beer belly. Excess alcohol, especially beer and sugary cocktails, is notorious for increasing visceral fat. Alcohol is metabolized by the liver and can promote fat storage centrally, besides adding empty calories. Heavy drinkers often have fatty liver and expanded waistlines, so if you're trying to lose visceral fat, limit alcohol to moderate levels. For example, less than 1 drink a day for women, less than 2 for men, or completely cut it out. Chronic stress and poor sleep are also visceral fat nightmares due to the hormone cortisol. High cortisol levels from prolonged stress or sleep deprivation have been linked to a greater visceral fat storage. Think of Cushing syndrome, a disease of excess cortisol. A key feature is pronounced belly fat. You can mitigate this by prioritizing good sleep, 7 to 8 hours a night, and employing stress reduction techniques, exercise, meditation, yoga, engaging hobbies, whatever you want. One study showed that people who slept 5 hours versus 7 hours had significantly more visceral fat gain over 5 years. Now, many interventions show a 10 to 30% reduction in visceral fat area within a few months of a healthy diet and exercise and lifestyle changes, and the benefits are huge. Lower visceral fat will improve your blood pressure, blood sugar, cholesterol, and cut your risk of the big ones: heart attack, stroke, diabetes, cancers. So to wrap up, what have we learned? Fasting isn't a miracle, it's a metabolic tool, and when used wisely, it can improve glucose control, gut motility, and even support the microbiome. But when abused or taken to extremes, it can backfire, such as disrupting hormones, slowing metabolism, and doing more harm than good. Context and consistency always win over gimmicks. Microplastics, they remind us that we are living in an environment we didn't evolve for, but we're not helpless. Tiny daily changes like avoiding heated plastics, washing clothes less often, choosing loose leaf tea, eating more fiber, introducing fermented foods genuinely reduce exposure. We don't need to be perfect, but we just need to be aware and take action. And finally, visceral fat, that is the silent threat we all need to take seriously. It's not just simply about aesthetics, but actually about the metabolic health, longevity, and lowering your disease risk long term. The prescription isn't sexy, but it's science-backed. Resistance training, cardio, good sleep, fiber, less stress, and not smoking. Those habits literally reprogram your metabolism from the inside out. Now, when you zoom out, all three of these topics connect around one idea: the body's ability to adapt and repair when you give it the right environment, time to reset and digest, real food, movement, and fewer synthetic stressors. So if there's one thing I want you to take away, it's this: your health isn't built on hacks, but actual habits. The smallest, most boring daily decisions compound, and that's the real biohack. If you found this episode useful, share it with someone who's tried every fasting trend or complains about bloating, but doesn't realize their plastic lunchbox might be part of the problem. And if you want more deep dives into evidence-based health, subscribe, leave a comment below, or tag me with your thoughts. I love hearing what resonated with you. Until next time, you hemoglobin smugglers, stay curious, and I'll see you next week.